One of the things I love about frontline reporting is that often journalists will reveal a bunch of information if you know how to look and read it. And there's some interesting stuff in this Radio Liberty, Radio Free Europe report from the front lines near Bakhmut. Let's get into it. Okay, so this is reportedly near Soledar in Ukraine. All right, so right there, I want to point out we're already into some details right in the B-roll here. Let's back it up. Here's what's interesting. First off, you've got this BMP providing support by fire. But wait, no, back it up a couple frames. Look at this guy. No body armor, no helmet. That's both kinds of gear that we've seen soldiers on the front lines use in almost every piece of reporting. Here's another example of a guy right here. He's got no helmet and doesn't look like there's body armor. Now, I'll give you a pass. Those heavy coats, if you're wearing pretty slick body armor without a lot of pouches and stuff, you can wear the coats over the body armor. And frankly, it's just a little bit more elegant way of doing things, especially if they take it on and off. But he's got no gloves. He's got just a hat and a winter coat, and he's behind what looks like some sort of belt-fed submachine or belt-fed general purpose machine gun. And that looks almost like an anti-aircraft weapon, maybe. If you're in the comments and you have any input on what this Soviet era machine is, let me know. So once again, you got this guy. He looks better equipped, right? He has, you notice, tall boots, right? A warm coat, a balaclava hat. Still don't see the all-important body armor and helmet. Yeah, it's Soviet made because you can see the rim on the cartridges there. That's a rimmed around and Soviet. The Soviet military is the only major military that even in the 20th century was using rimmed cartridges. It was sort of a weird thing where when the Soviets took power in like the 1910s, 1915 era, they had a massive number of these rounds from the Tsarist days when it was used in their Mosin Nagant. And so it was efficient to just build weapons around this pre-existing round that they had. Well, then when they designed the next generation of weapons, they decided to design it to take the round that the previous generation weapons used, and then the subsequent generation of weapons also used that round. And so now here we are in the 21st century, the 2020s, using a round that was considered antiquated in about the 1890s.
Неподалік лінії зіткнення, власне, в піхоти. Тут, як завжди, є заглиблення, холодна мерзла земля. І...
Also, this dude does like all the reporting for Radio Free Liberty, Radio Europe, so shout out to this dude.
Бій по флангу. Тут більш спокійніша ділянка, але бійці пильно стежать за лінією фронту, оскільки російські війська, зокрема ПВК-2.
So we've heard this from other places that the Wagner group is using these human assaults to probe the Ukrainian lines to find weaknesses.
Намагаються пройти, використовуючи усі рельєфи, пройти чи то в тил, чи на територію, яка зараз контролюється збройними силами.
They're screwing around in the back. Classic soldiers.
От потрібно стежити дуже пильно.
Interesting red tip. I don't know what Soviet red tip means. Okay, so this guy, again, he's got his comms, but no gloves, just a hat.
Дальней посадки підари зайшли туди, і ми оттуда до начала посадки з боєм виходили 2,5 часа.
Okay, so what he's pointing out is that within eyesight, within visual range, so probably within a couple hundred meters, sounds like Russians when he says in there, I assume he means in our defensive positions, in our trenches, and we had to pull out during the fighting that lasted 2.5 hours. So it sounds like they were pushing into Ukrainian positions. Eventually, the stormtroopers, which we've heard in some intercepted phone calls, Russians talk about the importance of these stormtrooper or shock troops. These troops pushed up, got inside the Ukrainian defensive lines, and then when that happens, it can be so hard to distinguish friend from foe that it's honestly easier to withdraw, regroup, reestablish defensive positions, and then go and push the enemy out. It sounds like that process took 2.5 hours. And honestly, it sounds terrifying. Having an enemy infiltrating inside your area, making it really hard to distinguish friend from foe, especially in the night. It can be just so tough.
Тоже тягувались по максимуму, вийшли вже, поки нас забрали. У кожного...
So what he says is we're moving back until we got evacuated. What I think he's describing is that they were engaged in a fighting retreat or a fighting retrograde operation, maintaining contact with the enemy, but bounding backwards, looking for another potential defensive position. And when he says we got evacuated, I think what he means is that another relief unit came up and established defensive positions and helped them stop the retreat, and that allowed their unit to be brought back to the rear to get re-equipped, get assessed for casualties, etc.
У кожного патронів по нулям уже було.
Yeah, so this says nobody had any ammunition. We escaped with the absolute minimum on us. That's probably why he has so little gear, is my suspicion.
На мінімалках вийшли. А тягувались на розстоянні голосового контакту з противником.
Yeah, so within shouting distance, the enemy, probably a function of those shock troops, is my guess.
Важко, звісно, коли вони зі всіх сторін лізуть.
Yep, when they're inside I think that's what he's trying to say. When they're inside your defensive positions, it feels like they're closing in around you from all sides because you just don't know.
Ну, це таке. Ось одного нашого затрьохсотили на своїй фоточці. Хлопець в рубашці родився.
Wow. That is so insanely lucky. That is within millimeters of being something that will paralyze you the rest of your life. I mean, look at how close that is to the spine. That is unbelievable.
Чого важливого так не зачепило. Слава Богу. Та й таке.
Wild. Right, so you see they're setting up here. Again, this is when we talk about the new defensive positions, having like these pre-positioned and pre-placed for fires. You establish what's called a sector of fire. You will look out, you'll be in a defensive position, and you will look out across a field like this. But what you'll do is you'll use, say, a laser rangefinder or just a map and your best estimation, and you will predetermine distances of different features. So they'll look out and they'll say, hey, you know that windmill out at, and you'll say, okay, northeast heading 63 degrees magnetic on your compass, and they'll say, okay, we know that is 600 meters away. So when you see enemy there at that location, you set the sights on your machine gun, or you use this, you set it right to 600 meters, right exactly where it needs to be, and you put rounds onto it, and you know they'll land right where they got to be. They're called target reference points. They also are a way to acknowledge dead zones, which is areas where your position cannot visualize the enemy, and what you do is you come up with ways to mitigate those dead zones. So you might say, hey, there's a berm in front of me, and I can't see if the enemy is maneuvering on the other side of the berm. So you'll mitigate that by saying, hey, whenever we fly a drone, we ask them to do a run up and down this berm because it's a known dead zone where our soldiers don't have eyes. That is just part of the operations involved in establishing a new defensive line, a defensive position. If you do it right, it can make it very hard for the enemy to approach, very hard to surprise you, and it allows you to put fires onto them much, much faster than they can put fires onto you.
Так, противотанковим комплексом бійці запускають ракету в бік російських військ, де може бути або техніка, або укріплення.
Right, they're probably trying to keep the Russians from establishing too much.
Штурмують щоденно. Тут відбиті вагнерівці до нас топають. В них кількість, напевно, безкінечна. Ну, за цю ніч було знищено на правому фланзі 30 і на лівому 12. Там потім відео вам покажу, там валяються вони.
Yeah, wild. These guys just hid down in what looks like the crater of an artillery shell, and that's where they were KIA. What I want to point out, let's see if I can find it here, is the map of Bakhmut. I think I can actually show you guys. Wait, there's a better one here. The better map of Bakhmut. When we zoom in, I think I know where they are, or where it's at least possible. It sounds like maybe what we're talking about is like somewhere in this region is what I suspect. Yeah, I suspect that these guys are probably around this area and that they're looking at Russians approaching this way. We have heard different maps have different control lines, but I suspect that the Wagner guys are trying to take these chunk of buildings here. They've been for a while, and it makes sense because you look at that, I think it's a Cornet missile. When they were using that, it was out over these open fields. So it sounds like Ukrainians have these defensive positions, and they're looking out across these open fields where the Wagner troops are pushing.
І так щоденно у нас по 10, по 15 приходить орків, умирає. Ну, вперлися вони в наші посадки і от пробують тут пройти.
And like we've talked about in the daily updates, being stuck in these patches of ground, these open areas, and trying to move is really hard. It's not impossible. Obviously, some of them were able to do it, but it is so difficult and costly. And this is what he talks about, where, you know, the ratio of Wagner KIA and WIA to his own troops is very, very like favorable. The problem is that, you know, it's for Russia, if you have to expend 10 mobilized troops to take one Ukrainian off the battlefield, that may be a winning ratio for them. I don't know the math. I'm not party to internal Russian logistics questions, but it depends on what they're seeing. But they may believe that that's a winning strategy.
Получається в них можливість накліпати орків тут і зараз. Отут у нас є зараз така можливість.
And this is what he says. He goes, you know, we have this opportunity. We're taking them down so well. And I've talked about this being, I think this is actually revealing the Ukrainian strategy in Bakhmut, which is minimize their own casualties and maximize Russian casualties. That's why events where the Russians get really close, where they start to compromise Ukrainian defensive positions, that's why the order is just pull back. Don't turn this into, don't make a last stand, don't expend your troops, because the Russians take so many casualties to make any of these advances.
Ми кліпаємо.
Just want to point out, this guy's got a really nice helmet and body armor.
Дай Боже, але нам потрібні ці пункти.
And you can see most of these troops here look properly equipped. Russia claimed it did control Soledar. Yeah, you guys could see, let's see if we think, so this says it was near Soledar. So it could be describing, trying to see, it could be describing maybe this region here. This would make sense. These are a series of smaller, maybe. And then you've got this, and then you've got these defensive works to the south. That would also kind of make sense in that, you know, Russia continued its advance, pushing Ukrainian forces back. It's tough to say. It could be anywhere. It looks like they've probably been stopped by this river here. I've mentioned that, you know, again, Ukraine's going to use the best natural barriers to form its defensive effort. So it could rely on this river, since it's hard to cross, and will be hard to cross for Russian forces. It seems to be generally accepted. Again, you can see that's a heavy mortar, by the way. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Of course, if you guys want access to the combat video breakdowns, the kind that YouTube definitely won't let me show you, but are almost always the viral videos, those are all in the Patreon. Thanks so much to my Lieutenant tier patrons. You guys are the ones who make this whole thing possible. And let me cover the content that YouTube says is not acceptable on their family-friendly platform. Anyway, thanks, guys. I'll catch y'all later.